The year was 1144, and in Europe, the news was grim. The siege of Edessa had swayed in favor of the Saracen invaders. Situated in the fertile plain of Upper Mesopotamia, the county of Edessa had been established by King Baldwin I of Jerusalem in 1098. And though it was the first Crusader state to be founded, it was also the first to fail. It was Raymond of Poitiers, Prince of Antioch, who broke the story. His father, William IX, Duke of Aquitaine, had earlier been a leader of the Crusade of 1101, and now the Principality of Antioch, yet another Crusader state, was in danger of sharing Edessa's fate. Already frustrated by his having to pay homage to the Byzantine emperor, Raymond dispatched a delegation to the papal court at Viterbo, Italy, seeking spiritual aid and military muscle. At the time of their arrival, Pope Eugene III had only recently been elected leader of the Papal States. In fact, on the 15th of February, 1145, conveniently the very day that his predecessor, Lucius II, was killed by a quote-unquote heavy stone thrown at him after taking the offensive against the Roman Senate. Born Bernardo Pignatelli, or possibly Piganelli, though everyone knew him as Bernardo or Bernardo de Pisa, Eugene III apparently owed his elevation to the fact that no one was eager to accept an office, and also because the election was conveniently held on safe Frangipani territory. The Frangipanis held immense political power during the First Crusade. It is said that they had the power to sway elections, remove popes. They played a significant part in the struggle between Pope Gregory VII and Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV. Briefly governed Rome from 1107 to 1108, and a little later down the road, Dante descended from them. Then again, the fact that Eugene III was a friend and pupil of Bernard of Clairvaux, co-founder of the Knights Templar and a major leader in the reformation of the Benedictine order through the nascent this is just killing me. so many pronunciations. And a major leader in the reformation of the Benedictine order through the nascent Cistercian order probably had something to do with it. I recommend you read along my paper if you want to keep up. I put transcripts under these videos so you can download it for yourself. Included in Raymond's delegation was Hugh, Bishop of Gibelum, though today it is known as Jabala in Syria. Hoping to counter the despairing report of Edessa's fate, Hugh told the Pope about a man named Prester John. This great Christian king, he said, ruled over a far eastern country resplendent in silver and gold. It was fed by a river flowing from paradise, or Eden, and inhabited by satyrs and wild men, unicorns and giants, pygmies, one-eyed cyclops, dogmen, and even the phoenix. John wasn't simply a king, though. He was a priest, more like a priest-king, a lineal descendant of the Magi who had visited the Christ child. Not only that, but many kings, 72 countries in number, paid homage to him. His enormous wealth was demonstrated by the fact that he carried a scepter of pure emeralds. Though Edessa had fallen, reports had broken through of John's victory over the Saracen kings of Media and Persia. Prester John had emerged victorious from the terrible battle that lasted 3 days, and having already stormed their capital at Ecbatana, intended to proceed to the kingdom of Jerusalem, by which aid might be given to the failing Crusader state, thereby securing Christendom once and for all time. There was only one catch. Prester John had difficulties crossing the swollen Tigris River. If only they would hasten to Jerusalem. Surely he would arrive in time to back their campaign. Hugh's report was first recorded by Odo of Duel, Bishop of Freising, Germany, who in turn was a confidant of the French abbot and statesman Suger. And sugar, if you haven't been made aware, is considered by many to be the father of Gothic architecture. Oh, the tangled web that we weave. But I digress. Odo was a news writer and a propagandist. During the Second Crusade, he served as the personal chaplain of King Louis VII of France, being sure to document the entire war from their march to Antioch to its explosive climax at Damascus. But I've already gotten ahead of myself, because it was through Odo and his publication of Chronicon in 1145, the same year as Raymond's delegation, that the world first heard about Prester John. In little time, tracts would be made, and news guzzlers everywhere in the Papal States would be reading of the mystical priest king who was currently en route across the Tigris River to support them. The Second Crusade was announced by the ruler of the Papal States 2 years later in 1147. Louis VIII of France and Conrad III of Germany, among a host of other European nobles, answered his call. The two armies marched separately across Europe, crossing into Byzantine territory to Anatolia, modern Turkey, where both were defeated by the Turks. In response, Odo, in league with a host of various Syriac Christian news outlets, claimed that the Byzantine emperor, Manuel Komnenos, had secretly ordered the Turks to attack them, thereby hindering the Crusaders' progress to Jerusalem. Eventually, Louis and Conrad reached Jerusalem with what remained of their armies, and in 1148, an ill-advised attack on Damascus resulted in their retreat. For Western Christendom, the Second Crusade ended in misery. Prester John never arrived with the supernatural army as papal intel had promised, and for the longest time, nobody knew what became of him. But then, in 1165, nearly 20 years after the Crusaders' humiliating defeat at Damascus, any lingering doubts as to the priest king's existence would be dispelled when Byzantine Emperor Manuel Komnenos received a letter. It was addressed from the fabulous Prester John, and this is what it said. Prester John, by the power and virtue of God and our Lord Jesus Christus, Lord of Lords, to Emmanuel, governor of the Romans, wishing him health and the extended enjoyment of divine favor. It has been reported to our majesty that you esteem our excellency and that mention or knowledge of our high one has reached you. And we have learned through our delegate that you should wish to send us some entertainments and trifles, which would satisfy our righteousness. Of course, we are only human and take it in good faith, and through our delegate we transmit to you some things. For we wish and long to know if, as with us, you hold the true faith, and if you, through all things, believe our Lord Jesus Christus. While we know ourselves to be mortal, the little Greeks regard you as a god, while we know that you are mortal and subject to human infirmities. Because of the usual munificence of our liberality, if there is anything you should desire for your pleasure, make it known to us through our delegate through a small note of your esteem, and you shall have it for the asking. Receive the hawkweed in our own name and use it for your own sake, because we gladly use your jar of unguents in order that we mutually strengthen and corroborate our bodily strength, and on account of our art, respect and consider our gift. If you should desire to come to our kingdom, we will place you in the greatest and most dignified place in our house, and you will be able to enjoy our abundance from that which overflows with us. And if you should wish to return, you will return possessing riches. Remember your end, and you will not sin forever. If you truly wish to know the magnitude and excellence of our highness, and over what lands our power dominates, then know and believe without hesitation that I, Prester John, am Lord of lords and surpass in all riches which are under the heaven, in virtue and in power, all the kings of the wide world. 72 kings are tributaries to us. I am a devout Christian, and everywhere do we defend poor Christians whom the empire of our clemency rules, and we sustain them with alms. We have vowed to visit the sepulchre of the Lord with the greatest army, just as it is befitting the glory of our majesty, in order to humble and defeat the enemies of the cross of Christ and to exalt his blessed name. Our magnificence dominates the three Indias, and our land extends from farthest India, where the body of St. Thomas the Apostle rests, to the place where the sun rises and returns by slopes to the Babylonian desert near the Tower of Babel. 72 provinces serve us, of which a few are Christian, and each one of them has its own king, who all are our tributaries. In our country are born and raised elephants, dromedaries, camels, hippopotami, crocodiles, Methagalanari, Camifiternus, Thinzerate, panthers, aurochs, white and red lions, white bears, white merlins, silent cicadas, griffins, tigers, llamas, hyenas, wild oxen, archers, wild men, horned men, fawns, satyrs, and women of the same kind, pygmies, dog-headed men, giants whose height is 40 cubits, one-eyed men, cyclops, and a bird, which is called the phoenix, and almost all kinds of animals that are under heaven. Our land flows with honey and abounds with milk. In a particular part of our country, no poisons harm, nor noisy frog croaks. There is no scorpion there, nor serpent creeping in the grass. Venomous animals are not able to live in that place, nor harm anyone. Amid the pagans and through one of our provinces flows a river which is called Edessa. This river, flowing out of paradise, extends its winding by various courses throughout the entire province, and in it are found natural gems, emeralds, sapphires, carbuncles, topazes, chrysolites, onyx, beryls, amethysts, sardonyxes, and many other precious gems. In the same place, a plant which is called acidios grows, the root of which, if someone carries it upon his person, he puts to flight the unclean spirit and causes it to announce who and from where it may be, and its name. And so unclean spirits never dare to invade anyone in that land. In another province of our whole pepper, which is exchanged for wheat, grain, leather, and breed, grows and is gathered. That land is also woody, like a forest of willows fully permeated with serpents. But when the pepper ripens, the forest is set on fire, and the fleeing serpents enter their holes, and then the pepper from the shrubbery is dried and cooked. But how it is cooked, no stranger is permitted to know. This grove is situated at the foot of Mount Olympus, from where a clear spring issues, containing all kinds of pleasant taste. The taste, however, varies each hour of the day and night, and flows out by a waterway for 3 days, not far from paradise, from where Adam was expelled. If someone who has fasted for 3 days taste of this spring, he will suffer no infirmity from that day on, and will always be as if he were 32 years old, however long he may live. There are small gems there which are called midriosi, and which eagles are often accustomed to bringing to our country, by which they rejuvenate and restore their sight. If someone should wear one on his finger, his sight would not fail, and if his sight diminishes, it is restored, and the more he uses his eyes, the sharper his sight becomes. Blessed by the proper charm, it renders a man invisible, banishes hatred, forges friendship, and drives away envy. Among the other things which marvelously happen in our kingdom, there is the sandy sea without water. Indeed, the sand moves and swells up in waves just like all other seas and is never still. This sea can be crossed neither by ship or by any other means, and for this reason, what type of land may lie beyond is not able to be known. And although it is completely devoid of water, nevertheless, diverse kinds of fish are found near the shore on our side, which are the most palatable and tasty to eat, and which are seen nowhere else. 3 days' distance from this sea are some mountains from which descends a river of stones, in the same condition as the sea, without water, and it flows through our kingdom all the way to the sea of sand. It flows for 3 days a week, and small and large stones flow by and carry with them pieces of wood, all the way to the Sea of Sand. And after the river has entered the sea, the stones and wood vanish and do not appear again. As long as it does not flow, anyone is able to cross it. On the other 4 days, it is accessible to crossing. Near the desert, between the uninhabited mountains, a certain rivulet flows beneath the earth, the entrance to which is not accessible except by chance. Indeed, sometimes the ground opens up, and if someone at the moment crosses over from there, he is able to enter. But he must quickly get out, if by any chance the ground may close up. And whatever he snatches up from the sand is precious stones and gems, for the sand and gravel are nothing but precious stones and gems. And the rivulet flows into another river of greater size, which the men of our kingdom enter and carry from there the greatest abundance of precious stones. Nor do they dare to sell them unless they first show them to our excellency. And if we wish to keep them in our treasury or for the payment of our force, our army, we receive them given to us at half price. Otherwise, they are able to sell them freely. The children in that land are raised in water, so that in order to find stones, they may live sometimes for 3 or 4 months entirely underwater. Beyond the stone river are the 10 tribes of the Jews, who, though they imagine they have kings of their own, are nevertheless our servants and tributaries to our excellency. In certain other provinces near the torrid zone, there are serpents who in our language are called salamanders. Those serpents are only able to live in fire, and they produce a certain little membrane around them, just as other worms do, which makes silk. The little membrane is carefully fashioned by the ladies of our palace, and from this we have garments and cloths for the full use of our excellency. Those clothes are washed only in a strong fire. Our serenity abounds in gold and silver and precious stones, elephants, dromedaries, camels, and dogs. Our gentle hospitality receives all travelers from abroad and pilgrims. There are no poor among us. Neither thief nor plunderer is found among us, nor does a flatterer have a place there, nor does avarice. There is no division. There is no division among us. Our people abound in all kinds of wealth. We have few horses and wretched ones. We believe that no people is equal to us in riches or in number of men. When we proceed to war against our enemies, we have carried before our front line in separate wagons 13 great and very tall crosses made of gold and precious stones in place of banners, and each one of these is followed by 10,000 mounted soldiers and 100,000 foot soldiers, besides those who are assigned to the packs and the cartloads and the bringing in of the food of the army. Indeed, when we ride out unarmed, a wooden cross, ornamented with neither paint, gold, nor gems, proceeds before our majesty, so that we may always be mindful of the possession or the passion our Lord Jesus Christus, and so does a golden vase full of earth, in order that we may know that our body will return to its proper origin, the earth. And another silver vase full of gold is carried before us in order that all may understand that we are Lord of Lords. In all the riches which are in the world, our magnificence exceeds in abundance and surpasses. There is not a liar among us, nor is anyone able to lie. And if someone there should begin to lie, he immediately dies. That is, he would be considered just as dead man among us, nor would any mention of him be made among us. That is, he would receive no further honor among us. We all follow truth, and we love one another. There is no adulterer among us. No vice rules among us. Every year we visit the body of the holy prophet Daniel with a large army in the Babylonian desert, and we are all armed on account of the wild beasts and other serpents, which are called frightful. Among us fish are caught, by whose blood purple things are dyed. We have many fortifications, and the strongest men and men of various forms. We rule over the Amazons and even the Brahmani. Indeed, the palace in which our sublimity dwells is in the image and likeness of the palace which the apostle Thomas planned for Gonophorus, king of the Indians, and the outbuildings and other buildings are similar in all ways to that palace. The paneled ceilings, beams, and epistelia are made of acacia. The roof of the same palace is of ebony, so that by any circumstance it is not able to be burned. Indeed, at either end of the palace, above the roof ridge, are 2 golden apples, and in each of these are 2 carbuncles, so that the gold shines in the day and the carbuncles sparkle at night. The larger gates of the palace are of sardonyx inlaid with serpent's horn, so that no one is able to enter secretly with poison. The others are of ebony, and the windows are of crystal. Some of the tables on which our court eats are of gold, and others are of amethyst, and the columns which support the tables are of ebony. Before our palace is a certain street in which our justice is accustomed to watch those triumphant in battle. The pavement is of onyx, and the walls inlaid with onyx, so that by the power of the stone, the courage of the warriors grows. In our aforementioned palace, no torch burns at night, except that which is fed by balsam. The chamber in which our sublimity sleeps is marvelously gilded and ornamented with all kinds of stones. If indeed wherever onyx should be used for adornment, then around it would be 4 carnelians of the same size, in order that by their virtue the irregularity of the onyx may be regulated. In the same chamber balsam always burns. Our bed is of sapphire on account of the stones of virtue and chastity. We have the most beautiful women, but they do not come to us except 4 times a year for the purpose of procreating children. And thus, sanctified by us, as Bathsheba by David, each one returns to her place. Once a day, our court dines. At our table every day, 30,000 eat besides those who enter and leave, and all these receive provisions each day from our treasury, such as horses and other expenses. This table is of precious emerald, and 2 columns of amethyst support it. The power of this stone allows no one sitting at the table to become inebriated. Before the doors of our palace, near the place where the fighters struggle in battle, is a mirror of very great size, to which one climbs by 125 steps. Indeed, the steps of the lower 1/3 are of porphyry and partly of serpentine and alabaster. From this point to the upper 1/3 of the steps are of crystal stone and sardonyx. Indeed, the upper 1/3 are of amethyst, amber, jasper, and sapphire. Indeed, the mirror is supported by a single column. Above this column is set a base. Upon the base are 2 columns, above which is another base, upon which are 4 columns, above which is another base, and upon which are 8 columns, above which is another base, and upon which are 16 columns, above which is another base, upon which are 32 columns, above which is another base, and upon which are 64 columns, above which is another base, upon which are also 64 columns, above which is another base, and upon which are 32 columns. And so in descending, the columns diminish in number, just as ascending they increase in number to 1. Moreover, the columns and the bases are of the same kinds of stones as the steps by which one ascends to them. Indeed, at the top of the uppermost column there is a mirror, consecrated by such art that all machinations and all things which happen for and against us in the adjacent provinces subject to us are most clearly seen and known by the onlookers. Moreover, it is guarded by 12,000 soldiers in the daytime, just as at night, so that it may not be by some chance or accident broken or thrown down. Every month, 7 kings serve us, with each one of them in order, as well as 62 dukes, 365 counts at our table, in addition to those who are charged with various duties at our court. At our table every day, 12 archbishops eat close by our side on the right. On the left eat 20 bishops, in addition to the Patriarch of St. Thomas and the Bishop of Samarcand and the Archbishop of Susa, where the throne and the dominion of our glory reside in the imperial palace. Every month, each one of them returns in turn to his own home. The others never depart from our side. Indeed, abbots serve us in our chapel according to the number of days in the year, and every month they return to their own homes. And the same number of others return the same service in our chapel every calendar. We have another palace, not of greater length, but of greater height and beauty, which was built according to a vision that, before we were born, appeared to our father, who, on account of the holiness and justice which marvelously flourished in him, was called godlike. And you can see here, for the remainder, this is a later addition to his letter. For it was said to him in a dream, build a palace for your son, who is to be born of you, and who will be king of the worldly kings and lord of lords of the entire earth. And that palace will have such a grace conferred to it by God that no one will ever be hungry, no one will be sick, nor will anyone, being inside, die on that on which he has entered. And if anyone has the strongest hunger and is sick to the point of death, if he enters the palace and stays there for some time, he will leave satisfied, as if he might have eaten 100 courses of food, and as healthy as if he might have suffered no infirmities in his lifetime. On the next morning, Quasideus, or godlike, my father, terrified by the entire vision, got up, and after he had thought and was greatly disturbed, he heard a sublime voice, in which all who were with him heard pronounced, O Quasideus, do what you have been ordered to do. Do not hesitate by any means, for all will be just as it has been predicted to you. By this voice, certainly my father was completely comforted, and immediately he ordered the palace to be built, in the construction of which only precious stones and the best melted gold was used for cement. Its heaven, that is, its roof, is one of the clearest sapphire, and the brightest topazes were set here and there in between them, so that the sapphires, like the purest heaven, and topazes in the manner of stars, illuminate the palace. Indeed, the floor is of large crystal flagstones. There is no chamber or other kind of division in the palace. 50 columns of the purest gold, formed like needles, are set in the palace near the walls. In each corner is one column, the rest are set between them. The height of one column is 60 cubits. Its circumference is such that 2 men are able to encompass it with their arms. And each one has its top a carbuncle of such size as a large amphora, by which the palace is illuminated as the world is illuminated by the sun. If you ask, why are the columns sharpened to a point just as needles? The cause is evidently this, because if they were as wide as the top at the bottom, the floor in the whole palace would not be so greatly illuminated by the brightness of the carbuncles. And likewise, if you ask whether either of the two are bright there, so great is the brightness that nothing can be imagined so small or so fine, if it is on the floor, that it is not able to be seen by anyone. There is no window or other opening there, so that the brightness of the carbuncles and other stones cannot be eclipsed by the brightness of the most serene heaven and sun. On the day of our birth, and whenever we are coronated, we enter that palace and remain inside as long as we might have stayed there to have eaten, and we leave there satisfied, as if we were filled with all kinds of food. If again you ask why, since the Creator of all will have made us the most powerful and the most glorious over all mortals, why our sublimity does not permit itself to be called by a more noble name than presbyter, your prudence ought not to be surprised. For we have in our court many officials who are more deserving of title and office as far as ecclesiastical honor is concerned, and they are provided with divine service even greater than ours. In fact, our steward is a primate and king, our cupbearer and archbishop and king, our marshal a king and archimandrite, and our chief cook a king and abbot. And on that account, our highness has not allowed himself to be called by the same names or distinguished by the same ranks, of which our court seems to be full, and therefore he chooses preferably to be called by a lesser name or inferior rank on account of his humility. We cannot at present tell you enough about our glory and power, but when you come to us, you will say that we are truly the Lord of Lords of the whole earth. In the meantime, you should know this trifling fact, that our country extends in breadth for 4 months in one direction. Indeed, in the other direction, no one knows how far our kingdom extends. If you cannot count the stars in heaven and the sand of the sea, then you can calculate the extent of our kingdom and our power. The epistle of Prester John. Not sure if you noticed, but Prester John totally roasts Komnenos, to whom the letter is addressed. That would be the Byzantine emperor. The writer calls him the governor of the Romans rather than the Byzantine emperor, thereby demoting him under the Holy Roman Emperor and the papacy. He then begins his letter by calling the emperor's citizens little Greeks, implying them to be small-minded, because only little Greeks would ever think of him as a god, you see. Prester John adds insult to injury by undermining the emperor's pretensions to grandeur, noting his own fantastical wealth, power, and humility rather than that of Komnenos. Perhaps this would be a good moment to add that Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa and Pope Alexander III received their own copies. How nice of him to send additional copies to his Roman competition, or else we may have never learned about it. The letter is a certified hit piece against the Byzantine Empire, when it is not doubling as a travel brochure, for sure. Again, not sure if you noticed, but Prester John does not seem remotely interested in whether or not the citizens of the West live a holy, set-apart life, devoted exclusively to the teachings of Christ. He gives no instructions, rehearses no commands, habits which would normally be instinctual for priests half as learned and moral as he claims to be, capable of quoting chapter and verse on a whim. And why would he? To do so would undermine the Pope. His intent seems to be one which certifies his awesome existence while simultaneously discrediting the Byzantines. A third crusade may not have materialized for another 20 years, but it was on the menu, cooking on the back burner nonetheless. On that outing, Philip II of France and Frederick Barbarossa, Holy Roman Emperor, along with King Richard the Lionheart of England, from which we nab our Robin Hood story, would lead to the charge to reconquer the Holy Land following the capture of Jerusalem by Saladin in 1187. And what does a little predictive programming hurt? A spoonful of sugar makes the propaganda go down. The only awkward part in all of this is that Prester John never once mentions the fact that he stood the Romans up during their Second Crusade, being incapable of figuring out how to cross the Tigris River. If he thinks the Tigris is too difficult a hurdle to manage, then you can forget about the Euphrates. His epistle, copied into countless tracts, by which more than 100 surviving manuscript copies and in several languages have survived, not to mention the numerous variants, tells us that it was extremely popular. That or Prester John was shoved down their throats. Same difference. Included among those languages is Hebrew. Interesting. But then, oddly enough, not a single Greek letter has been discovered. What are the odds? Was it not written to a Byzantine emperor? You think Greek would be more important than, say, Old Slavonic, which it was also found in. We are therefore pressed with the follow-up question: did the writer even make the effort to lick a stamp and drop it into Komnenos' mailbox, or was it never intended for him to read to begin with? It appears to be written for anyone and everyone but the man he was attempting to belittle. The other two individuals who received Prester John's letter was, as mentioned, Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa and Pope Alexander III. FYI, they weren't on good terms. During the papal election of 1159, the majority of cardinals chose Bendenili, aka Alexander III, though a minority went with Cardinal Octavian, who took the name Victor IV. Of course, he didn't win. Regardless of his initial win, that'd be Alexander III, Alexander faced strong imperial opposition in Italy, and in 1162 fled to France, where he remained in 1165, building support from Kings Louis VII of France and Henry II of England. His move not only prevented a total victory by the emperor, but it also began a line of anti-popes through Victor IV. Well, anyways, Prester John wrote a letter. That very year, 1165, just so happened to coincide with Alexander III's return to Rome. What are the odds? Barbarossa was absent, and Alexander figured it was as good a timing as any to legitimize his papacy. Also, perfect clockwork precision on part of the Pony Express, traveling all the way from the Orient. The way it went down is that Barbarossa returned to Italy and sent Alexander packing. It wouldn't be until 1177 that Barbarossa acknowledged Alexander III as the true pope. In front of the Church of St. Mark's in Venice, which I believe I've been to, Barbarossa received the kiss of peace from the Pope, and that was that. Sort of. 1177 just so happens to be the year that Pope Alexander III got around to writing a response letter to Prester John. 12 years after the fact, 12 years after he received his letter, he decides to write him back. Perhaps he simply needed a pen pal, IDK. Impeccable timing, either way. You have to wonder if Barbarossa rolled his eyes at that one. And this is what it says. Alexander Episcopus Papa Service. Oh, that's the Italian. I'm not going to read all that. I will save you the trouble of reading the entire letter. I'll save myself the trouble of reading it all in Latin as well, and also of translating. That is the opening line, and here is my attempt at decoding it. Bishop Alexander, Pope, servant of the servants of God, beloved in Christ's Son, John, the illustrious and magnificent King of the Indians. What I do recommend is that you read about Prester John on the Catholic Encyclopedia. The reason being is that they take letters like this one and insist that the identity of the person whom Pope Alexander is writing to is inconclusive. LOL. It must be some other John in India. The problem is that we are treated to 5 whopping centuries of sloppy lies by a succession of power-hungry popes, and the Catholics can't have that. It's why Catholic Encyclopedia tries to explain this and so many other Prester John references as misunderstandings by the gullible public. Apparently, we're all still misunderstanding the quotes today, to this very day. Sometimes they will even infer that the popes are the ones being pranked by the little people, LOL again. Though I get the feeling that not even they believe their own excuses at the Catholic Encyclopedia. You guys get that? I mean, if they can't admit that their very popes would be making up fictional people and letters to round the people up and control them. The official explanation as to why Pope Alexander III wrote Prester John a letter, and a very long one at that, had to do with a chance meeting between Philip, the Pope's personal physician, and a representative of the priest king of Prester John while on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. I'd like to imagine it happened at an Armenian restaurant due to their shared love of korba soup and kebab. Their conversation ended with a have my people call your people sort of thing. Well, according to Philip, that would be, of course, the Pope's personal physician, Prester John wished to embrace the Roman faith and to build a church in Rome, and maybe even an altar in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre at Jerusalem while he was at it, which sounds good for business by the sounds of it. The Pope, having just emerged victorious from a long struggle with Frederick Barbarossa, as you will recall, wasted no time whatsoever letting everyone in the media know that he had established relationships with the Christian kingdom of the East, with that Prester John fellow. The brunt of it had to do with his welcoming Prester John into the church while cautioning him, the letter, he's cautioning him against boastfulness. It's okay if you did it with the Byzantine emperor, but don't do it with us. Cautioning him against boastfulness about his vast power and immense wealth, because, you know, Barbarossa and the Pope would not be challenged. He licked the stamp, but not before first having his letter copied and passed around, clipped to every water cooler in the kingdom. We have many copies of those. How do you figure Alexander proposed to carry his exceedingly complicated fiction through to fruition? Remember when Walt Disney sponsored Nazis from Operation Paperclip on the Disneyland TV show in the 1950s? Good times. Would the legend of Prester John become like NASA and the moon landing, in which case the Vatican would lose the ability to write letters back and forth, and the technology would be too difficult to build back up again? I'm not getting a very good feeling about this one. Actually, that is exactly what happened. If you follow the Prester John narrative, it's pretty funny. I seem to recall that episode of The Brady Bunch. I was raised on the Brady Bunch reruns, so I refer to it a lot. I seem to recall that episode of The Brady Bunch where Jan invented a boyfriend named George Glass, hoping to impress Marcia. You know, Marcia always got the boys. Even she had to come clean in the end. On a side note, in a very Brady sequel movie, that one came out in the 90s, George Glass started out fictitious, but then turned out to be real in the end. Take a mental note of that, because hoaxes can be a spoof on reality, and in some instances, they can become reality. We are told the Pope sent Philip, the only other person in the know, as a personal courier to the kingdom of Prester John. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, where is this going? He began his journey sailing from Venice in September of 1177 and is recorded as having landed in Palestine. Oh, what a relief. I was half thinking somebody was going to, sink his boat. Well, from there, presumably the port of Acre, he set out on his journey through Saracen territory to the unknown realm beyond the Tower of Babel. Afterwards, he was never heard from again. Bummer. Hopefully a giant or a cyclops didn't impale him after so long of a foot journey. That was the end of it, right? Well, no, not exactly. Prester John emerged yet again soon after Damietta was conquered by the Crusaders in November of 1219. It was the Fifth Crusade. The Fourth Crusade was a total bust, or so we're led to believe. The stated intent of that one, the fourth one, was to recapture the Saracen-controlled city of Jerusalem by first defeating the powerful Sultan in Egypt, Al-Adil, brother of Saladin. But then, for whatever reason, a series of political events culminated with the sacking of Constantinople in 1204. The Byzantine capital, which the Romans hated. The Fourth Crusade just so happened to detour and sack Constantinople. Moving forward, the Crusades and their Venetian allies entered a period known as Franco-Cratia, or rule of the Franks in Greek, in which the Latin Empire of Constantinople was established versus the Greek one, with puppet Emperor Baldwin I essentially elected by the Venetians. Oh, I'm sure that was all an accident and for the health and freedom of humanity and all that. Nothing to see here. Let's move on. Well, neither Egypt nor Jerusalem were captured, as was the stated plan. The Crusader armies must have gotten the wrong roadside directions. And so Innocent III again called for another bloodbath. Hold on, I need another drink of coffee here. Where was I? Innocent III again called for another bloodbath. That's better. The starring lineup this time around involved Andrew II of Hungary and Leopold IV of Austria, soon to be joined by John the Brian, titular king of Jerusalem. The Fifth Crusade continued the official order of business of the Fourth Crusade and hoped to reacquire Jerusalem and the rest of the former kingdom of Jerusalem by first conquering Egypt, which was ruled by the powerful Sultanate Al-Adil, brother of Saladin, as I mentioned earlier. As an added motivation, the Egyptians had stolen a piece of the true cross, much as frat boys might a university mascot, and the Latin Byzantines wanted it back. Also, Francis of Assisi, interestingly enough, the animal preacher, played a large part in this one, perchance because our controllers were later trying to figure out how to give all these different characters starring roles in the fiction. So much going on. Here we go. By the spring of 1221, the Crusaders had reached a stalemate. Little ground was covered, and except for the suicidal Templars, few seemed willing to paint the sands with blood. What are the chances that the Crusaders became aware of a book, a holy book, written in Arabic, an Arabic book of prophecy? Are you ready for this? The prophecy foretold of an Easter Sunday in which the religion of Muhammad would be abolished once and for all. This blessed Easter event was also time-stamped as landing in the year 1222. Impeccable timing. So glad they dug it up from the janitor's closet when they did. If only the book of prophecy hadn't gone missing as well. Bummer. Well, rumors circulated of a Christian uprising against the Saracen, which by July of that year included the army of a certain King David, a descendant of the legendary Prester John, which was on its way from the east to the Holy Land to join the crusade and win the day. Where have we heard this one before? Apparently, King David created such a buzz that the Frankish crusaders were finally motivated to launch their attack on Cairo. Will you be surprised to learn that the Fifth Crusade was another dud? It ended with nothing gained for the West, or so we're told, though a heavy loss of life, I can believe. Criticism abounded among leadership whose ambitions, not surprisingly, were judged to lay in Europe rather than the Holy Land. They weren't really interested in the Holy Land. They just wanted their power in Europe. The true cross was never recovered, as the Egyptians had conveniently lost it, and King David never arrived. Or didn't he? The historians will tell you that there was a mix-up in the papal intel department, and that the King David story was really a mistranslation originating from the script writers in the news regarding the reality of Genghis Khan and the Mongol invasions of Persia. Oh, gee. You have to excuse my skepticism. More coffee. Hold on here. Try that again. You will have to excuse my skepticism. See, I get a reboot when I drink coffee. It's awesome. On this one, mostly because not even Genghis Khan is likely who we are told. To have an understanding of what I'm getting at, you have to read my Lost Tribes of Tartaria paper. I gave a presentation on YouTube a couple years back on that. I had absolutely no clue going into this that the legend of Prester John would work as a spin-off, but there is research for you. They actually connect really well. Oh, sure, Genghis Khan appears to line up with the Fifth Crusade. Khan arrived, he conquered, must be King David. But then recall the failed prophecy of the Second Crusade. Prester John was expected to cross the Tigris and the Euphrates in that one as well. What I failed to tell you at the time is that the papal intel department were serial offenders of accidentally having their wires crossed, because another Genghis Khan story can be attributed to that one as well. The Arabic historian Ibn al-Athar, and you can see that he lived from 1160 to 1233 officially, wrote that in the year of the Hegira of 536, which would be 1141 according to the official Western timeline, the Persian Sultan Sanjar, the most powerful of the Seljuk princes, was completely vanquished by a mysterious conqueror from the east that very year, not very far from the ancient Ecbatana. This mysterious conqueror was Kukulkan, kind of like the Ku Klux Klan, but Kukulkan, or Korkan of northern China, who arrived at the head of a mighty army, killing Sanjar and 100,000 of his men. And so it can be stated with some level of assurance that Prester shows up in history seemingly whenever a conquering king from the east leaves a trail of wreckage across Asia and Mesopotamia, expanding the kingdom we now know as Tartaria. Are these repeated events, or simply the same event which is then scattered into numerous breadcrumb trails, hoping to throw us off the X marks the spot of his story? I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest to learn that all of these various crusades are just the 500s being rehearsed over and over and over again. If so, then Genghis Khan might also serve as another puzzle piece of the War of the Sons of Light against the Sons of Darkness puzzle. There's another link for you to a paper presentation I gave about 2 weeks ago. Speaking of which, the slaughter committed by the Mongols soon proved to the crusading Christians that Khan was no pious Prester John. You will need to recall which side of the arguments we are receiving our information from the RCC side. It is here where the propaganda department takes a humorous turn, because the papal ministry then declared Khan's crew to be the wild hordes first mentioned in the presbyter's letter to the Byzantine emperor. Apparently, the wild men from beyond the wall had risen up against their own beloved ruler, King David, murdering both him and his father, Prester John, by which we read the following quote. In the year of our Lord, 1202, after murdering their ruler, David, the Tatars set about destroying the people. And that comes from Speculum Historiale. Well, darn. Rest in peace, Prester John, then. The person doing the writing was Vincent of Beauvais, a Dominican friar at the Cistercian monastery of Réaumont Abbey, France. Not sure when his account was written, but Vincent is said to have died in 1264, making this one of the oldest references to the Tartars on the timeline. Were the Tartars in league with Genghis Khan? And in truth, an army of Yasharel, whom the Circus Fathers feared, is a question which I have long pondered. Or, contrarily, was in reality something even worse for everyone involved? Were the Tartars the children of Tartarus, whom Prester John and his ilk had for so long labored to hold back? Riddles in the dark. But let's keep on course with our reconnaissance mission anyhow. Now, this is kind of a really interesting map here. This is the Catalan map of the world. I'll let you just look at that real quick. We do not receive a single surviving map of Prester John. None that I have been capable of tracking down in the very least. There might be some out there. I haven't found them until the whereabouts of 1450. And when we do, Catalan map of the world places him in Nubia, of all places, between the two branches of the Nile. He also receives center of the earth treatment, whereas usually it is reserved for Jerusalem or Yerushalayim. Catalan refers to a region of Spain, and most everyone has heard of Catalina Island off the coast of Southern California. Catalan was a Jewish kingdom. And in fact, the man who made the Catalan map of the world was, well, Christus Abraham. And he was a Jewish book illuminator. Wait a second. Wait a darn second. Nubia? Last I checked, the Nile was in Africa rather than India. Nubia also happens to be pretty darn close to Kush. It may even be an X marks the spot on the treasure map. Now, the book of Jasher, that would be Jasher, also happened to show face in Spain among the Spanish Jews. And about the same hour, though, come on. We know they were just another branch of the Goths. That would be a reference to my Sons of Light presentation. Recall your Jasher, his story. Specifically, chapters 72 through 76. After Moshe fled from Egypt, he reigned over Cush for 40 years, an important number. He even married Adoniah, the queen, former wife of Kikianus, though he never once had conjugal relations with her. The map is terribly difficult to read, and believe me, I have tried. I will therefore have to bank off the claim given to in the Catholic Encyclopedia when it states, towers are to be found at the foots of the Caucasus, and underneath is written, the presbyter King John built these towers to prevent the Tatars, from reaching him. Are you remotely aware of where the Caucasus is? It's a transcontinental region between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, mainly comprising of Armenia, Georgia, and parts of southern Russia, Goth territory. The Caucasus is traditionally considered a natural barrier between Eastern Europe and West Asia, though this just so happens to be the exact region where Alexander the Great is said to have built his gates. Let me just show you this again real quickly here. So this is it right here. The greater Caucasus Mountains. You can see the Black Sea over here on the left, Caspian Sea right here. Just above that would be like going into like Serbia and Russia. Go to the left, you're going into Germany territory. And then, of course, you see Turkey down here to the south. And here's an old picture of, I believe, Alexander's Gate. And you see the Gog and Magog people there on the other side of it. The reason why Alexander built it, according to Pliny the Elder, Josephus, Pseudo-Hegesippus, Jerome, Procopius, as well as numerous voices in rabbinic literature, is so that the forces of Gog of Magog might be held back until their proper hour. Well, isn't that interesting? A similar narration is mentioned in Al-Kahf, or The Cave, a book found within the Quran. In that account, Gog and Magog were walled off by Du al-Qarnayn, a righteous ruler and conqueror who reached the extremities of the west and the east. His name apparently means possessor of the two horns, hinting heavily at Alexander. Well, apparently, Alexander the Great either didn't build the gate according to the Catalan map maker, though more likely what he was saying was that King John helped to strengthen the Caucasus region, which Alexander had built with additional towers. Only now the Gog-Magog people were listed off as the Tartars we've been hearing so much about. What is going on here? Who are the Tartars? Are they Yasharel or the naked cannibals from so many maps? And I'll go ahead and say it. Are they the Ashkenazi who would later conquer modern Israel from the North Country, or from the same region, by the way, in 1948? Riddles in the dark, I tell you. A lot going on here. Oh, this map here is glorious. This is the Catalan Atlas. So above you see the entire map, and you kind of have to zoom in on it, obviously. And here are little pieces of it that I want to talk about. The Catalan Atlas predates the Catalan map of the world by nearly a century. It is claimed to have been created in the 1370s or the early 1380s, and most will settle on 1375 for the sake of convenience. And as such, has been described as the most important map of the Middle Ages in the Catalan language, perhaps even the zenith of medieval map work in any language. Catalan once again reminds us that the same map makers are being employed. As in-depth analysis may require my attention at another hour. An in-depth analysis may require my attention at another hour, particularly since righteous kings are shown to rule over the swath of the Euro-Asian and African realm. Let me just show you really quickly. So you see here, it seems to really, the purpose of this map seems to focus on specific kings that are ruling in certain areas. And then up here on the right side, so right here you see kind of the Black Sea and the Catalan Mountains, and Turkey, Armenia would be down here. But then over here to the right, you have, well, this is a map of India. I'll be talking about that. Here you see the walled off, you see Gog, Magog, and then over here is the Antichrist, interestingly enough, on the other side of the wall, over there in Tartaria territory. In India, no mention is made of Prester John, though two separate kings are depicted. And I showed you a quick picture of that. On the southern tip, we come to learn of the king of Colombo. This would be in India. On closer inspection, he is shown waving a Tav flag. Is it him? But then the king in the north of India is listed as the Sultan of Delhi, and here's how he is described. Here is a great sultan, powerful and very rich. The sultan has 700 elephants and 100,000 horsemen under his command. He also has countless foot soldiers. In this part of the land, there's a lot of gold and precious stones. So I'm referring to this right up here on the left. There's King Colombo down the bottom and the Sultan of Delhi up there on the left. Picture of one of his elephants. 700 elephants and 100,000 horsemen under his command, not to mention the gold and precious stones. Is he the Prester John we are looking for? The Prester John in Africa fan base. Let me say that again. The Prester John in Africa fan base, because there's a lot of that. Well, tell me I'm looking in the wrong area. Maybe I am. Maybe I'm not. What are you going to do about it? Going off the Gog-Magog theme, which has already been established, check out the Gog-Magog region of the map, why don't you? It is Tartaria. And also look at where the Antichrist can be found. Tartaria again. Whoops. The map maker has even drawn a wall intended to keep the Gog-Magog people and reign of the Antichrist out. And it's nowhere near the Caucasus mountain region from where it is so often reported, nor is it anywhere in Africa, which is why I'm here to suggest something. Alexander's Gate has never been discovered, though many noted historians claim it was so. Oh, just because we can't find the GPS coordinates for a wall large enough to keep Kong out doesn't mean it wasn't there. Our controllers very likely had it removed. The references, that is. After they climbed over it, that is. So they could have destroyed the wall as well. But then what if the gate and the wall and the many towers being referred to really points to the Great Wall of China? It's worth considering. Has anyone taken the measuring tape out on that thing? It's a reported 13,170 miles long. Dang. The wall apparently began construction around 220 BC, a short century after Alexander, only to end construction in the 1600s. Isn't that convenient? I propose to you that the Millennial Kingdom ended around 1500, and then the wall was completed shortly afterwards or even beforehand. Gog-Magog invasion, was it? That will require another investigation. Getting back to those two kings of India, the Catalan Atlas gives us another titillating clue as Marco Polo, the man, the myth, and the legend, makes an appearance. He's actually in the map. Actually, that's him right there. So there's another close-up of the map there on the right. And there he is, leaving Antichrist territory. Actually, no, it's upside down. I take that back. So he's actually moving to Tartaria, Antichrist territory there. And what, pray tell, is he up to? Traveling east by the look of it. Undoubtedly a reference to his famed Pax Mongolica expedition. Pax Mongolica is a Latin for Mongol peace, though it has a lesser-known name, Pax Tartarica, meaning Tatar peace. Take your pick. Pax Mongolica or Pax Tartarica. They are a direct reference to Pax Romana, the 200-year-long period of Roman history starting in 27 BC, which is often described as the golden age of Roman imperialism. The same can be said of the conquest of the Mongol Empire in the 13th and 14th centuries. Pax Tartaria, I'll just call it that, is used to describe the period of relative peace that followed the Mongols' vast and violent conquest of Eurasia, resulting in trade and technology. How will you respond when I tell you the newly acquired age of peace and tech arrived only after Genghis Khan dispatched Prester John? Bummer. The entire episode is told to us in Marco Polo's book. This is what it says. Originally, the Tartars, that's easier to say, the Tartars. Sometimes they leave out the R and it's called the Tatars. But originally, the Tartars dwelt in the north on the border of Chorka. Their country was one of great plains, and there were no towns or villages in it, but excellent pasture lands with great rivers and many sheets of water. In fact, it was a very fine and extensive region, but there was no sovereign in the land. They did, however, pay tax and tribute to a great prince who was called in their tongue Unkkan, the same that we call Prester John. Him, in fact, about whose great dominion all the world talks. The tribute he had of them was one beast out of every 10, and also a tithe of all their other gear. Now it came to pass that the Tartars multiplied exceedingly, and when Prester John saw how great a people they had become, he began to fear that he should have trouble from them. So he made a scheme to distribute them over sundry countries and sent one of his barons to carry this out. When the Tartars became aware of this, they took it much amiss, and with one consent, they left their country and went off across a desert to a distant region towards the north, where Prester John could not get at them to annoy them. Thus, they revolted from his authority and paid him tribute no longer, and so things continued for a time. Now it came to pass in the year of Christ's incarnation, 1187, that the Tartars made them a king whose name was Genghis Khan. He was a man of great worth and of great ability or eloquence and valor. And as soon as the news that he had been chosen king was spread abroad through those countries, all the Tartars in the world came to him and owned him for their lord. And right well did he maintain the sovereignty they had given him. What shall I say? The Tartars gathered to him an astonishing multitude. And when he saw such numbers, he made a great furniture of spears and arrows and such other arms as they used, and set about the conquest of all those regions until he had conquered 8 provinces. When he conquered a province, he did no harm to the people or their property, but merely established some of his own men in the country along with a proportion of theirs, while he led the remainder to the conquest of other provinces. And when those whom he had conquered became aware how well and safely he protected them against all others, and how they suffered no ill at his hands, and saw what a noble prince he was, then they joined him heart and soul and became his devoted followers. And when he had thus gathered such a multitude that they seemed to cover the earth, he began to think of conquering a great part of the world. Now in the year of Christ, 1200, he sent an embassy to Prester John and desired to have his daughter to wife. But when Prester John heard that Genghis Khan demanded his daughter in marriage, he waxed very wroth and said to the envoys, What impudence is this, to ask my daughter to wife? Was he not well that he was my liegeman and serf? Get ye back to him and tell him that I had ever set my daughter in the fire than give him. I think he's saying I would rather set my daughter in the fire than give her in marriage to him, and that he deserves death at my hand, rebel and traitor that he is. So he bade the envoys be gone at once and never come into his presence again. The envoys, on receiving this reply, departed straightway and made haste to their master and related all that Prester John had ordered them to say, keeping nothing back. When Genghis Khan heard the brutal message that Prester John had sent him, such rage seized him that his heart came nigh to bursting within him, for he was a man of a very lofty spirit. At last he spoke, and so loud that all who were present could hear him. Never more might he be prince if he took not revenge for the brutal message of Prester John, and such revenge that insult never in this world was so dearly paid for. And before long, Prester John should know whether he was his serf or no. So then he mustered all his forces and levied such a host as never before was seen or heard of, sending word to Prester John to be on his defense. And when Prester John had sure tidings that Genghis was really coming against him with such a multitude, he still professed to treat it as a jest and a trifle. For, quote he, these be no soldiers. Natheless, I like that. I'm going to start, instead of saying nevertheless, natheless, he marshaled his forces and mustered his people and made great preparations in order that if Genghis did come, he might take him and put him to death. In fact, he marshaled such a host of many different nations that it was a world's wonder. And so both sides got them ready to battle. And why should I make a long story of it? Genghis Khan with all his hosts arrived at a vast and beautiful plain, which was called Tanduk, belonging to Prester John, and there he pitched his camp. And so great was the multitude of his people that it was impossible to number them. And when he got tidings that Prester John was coming, he rejoiced greatly, for the place afforded a fine and ample battleground. So he was right glad to tarry for him there, and greatly longed for his arrival. But now leave we Genghis and his host, and let us return to Prester John and his people. Now the story goes that when Prester John became aware that Genghis was, with his host was marching against him, he went forth to meet him with all his forces, and advanced until he reached the same plain of Tanduk, and pitched his camp over against that of Genghis Khan at a distance of 20 miles. And then both armies remained at rest for 2 days, that they might be fresher and hardier for battle. So when the two great hosts were pitched on the plains of Tanduk, as you have heard, Genghis Khan one day summoned before him his astrologers, both Christians and Saracens, and desired them to let him know which of the two hosts would gain the battle, his own or Prester John's. The Saracens tried to ascertain, but were unable to give a true answer. The Christians, however, did give a true answer and showed manifestly beforehand how the event should be. For they got a cane and split it lengthwise and laid one half on this side and one half on that, allowing no one to touch the pieces. And one piece of cane they called Genghis Khan, and the other piece they called Prester John. And then they said to Genghis, Now mark, and you will see the event of the battle, and who shall have the best of it. For whose cane soever shall get above the other, to him shall victory be. He replied that he would fain see it, and bade them begin. Then the Christian astrologers read a psalm out of the Psalter and went through other incantations. And lo, while all were beholding, the cane that bore the name of Genghis Khan, without being touched by anybody, advanced to the other that bore the name of Prester John, and got on top of it. When the prince saw that, he was greatly delighted, and seeing how in this matter he found the Christians to tell the truth, he always treated them with great respect, and held for them for men of truth forever after. Marco Polo's book, released at the start of the 14th century, also discussed Prester John several times. Polo claimed, oh, okay, that's actually no. Let me read from chapter 50. And after both sides had rested well those 2 days, they armed for the fight and engaged in desperate combat. And it was the greatest battle that ever was seen. The numbers that were slain on both sides were very great, but in the end, Khan obtained the victory. And in the battle, Prester John was slain. And from that time forward, day by day, his kingdom passed into the hands of Genghis Khan till the whole was conquered. And that's the Travels of Marco Polo 46 through 50 with a little footnote there that I started reading from. Well, there you have it. The Tartars were not fond of Prester John. They moved further north, hoping to avoid tribute, potentially into Magog territory if the Catalan Atlas has anything to say on the subject. And of course, the same can be said of Genghis Khan. He wasn't a fan. One might even say the newly acquired age of peace and tech did not simply arrive after Genghis Khan dispatched Prester John, but because of the fact that he dispatched Prester John. And actually his son David too. Who is the hero and the villain, and which of the two are victims of propaganda in this story? Was Prester John's kingdom an RCC outpost on the furthest corners of the earth? Another spook and Augustan spy network outed? Was he fabricated for purposes of propaganda? Or contrarily, was he a legitimate kingdom heir disposed of by the Gog-Magog Tartarians, whom he had for so long attempted to suppress? Either Tartaria is the kingdom of Mashiach, as some researchers are beginning to claim, or it can be chalked up to the first wave of rebels broken forth from the gates of Tartarus, hoping to bring the kingdom down, which is more in line with where I'm at. Why did our controllers scrub Tartaria? There is good reason for either context. All right, so now we're looking at the kingdom of Armenia. We're going to go visit there really quickly. You can see Armenia is just south. The kingdom of Armenia is just south of the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea. You can see the this is their emblem here, their flag. Prester John and the Armenians. Backtracking only a little, but for good reason. Another notable reference to Prester John can be found in 1181, some 30 years and some change after the Second Crusade. The Advent Annals apparently spoke of the presbyter as King of Armenia. So this is one of the older references. He's called the King of Armenia rather than that of India. That's interesting. I say apparently because I have not been able to track down an English copy of the 12th century text for myself. It should be dutifully noted that India did not become the India that we know and love until the 18th century. Throughout medieval history, India was the generic name of the far distant land in the east. And mind you, generic. There was no like markers or boundary of a country of India. It was just a reference to the far east, rather than an actual GPS coordinate on the map. Prester John says in his letter that he was lord over the 3 Indias. How many Indias can you count on the map? Today, at least. The question of the hour is whether or not Armenia could be classified as one of the 3 Indias. I don't really know. I would say no, it cannot. The kingdom of Armenia happened to reside directly below the Caucasus where, as the weight of evidence would have it, the Gog-Magog people were being kept out from the greater kingdom, according to many references. You guys can debate that, but again, that's what the older references do say. Look at their flags. Why don't you? The Lion of Yehuda was raised on high, dancing as he flapped its tail and mane in the wind. In my Pilgrim's Path paper, I specifically thought to name the Armenians as guardians of medieval Jerusalem as well, which is interesting considering their neighbors, the Caucasians. Can it be said that they were guardians of greater renewed Jerusalem as well? Among the various archbishops who arrive in his letter to eat with him, the bishop of Samarkand is counted among them. Now, Samarkand is in modern, I can't even pronounce this, Uzbekistan. Find that one on the map. I dare you. Apparently, nobody could then either. Well, it is just on the other side of the Caspian Sea from Armenia, potentially speaking of his Armenia origins, though many have suspected Tibet as the foundation for the Prester John legend. It seems like people like in the 1700s and stuff were trying to look to Tibet, thereby connecting us with Shangri-La. And anyways, it is somewhat closer to Uzbekistan as the road lies. Prester John's connection with the king of Armenia would certainly help to explain why the Catalan map of the world had him building fortifications there. The reference has been enough for some historians to claim Ivan Zakarian, the Armenian prince, along with his brother Zakar, was the beginnings of the Prester John legend, mostly because the Armenian brothers gained a great victory over the Fertile Crescent in 1124. So there you go. According to official history, the Armenians perchance gave rise to Prester John during the First and Second Crusades, whereas the Khans continued his legend in the Fifth. Genghis Khan was said to have been born in 1162. He would have been 3 years old in 1165 when Prester John wrote his letter. The chronology actually works on the official timeline. Prester John and the Amazonians. Among many observations, you may have noticed that Prester John claimed to have ruled over the Amazons. I'm not sure how the Amazons felt about that, but there is a man for you, always somehow managing to land on top. Their inclusion is fascinating for sure, because the most ancient texts envisioned the homeland of the Amazons at the periphery of the known world, kind of like Prester John's kingdom. The Amazon queen in particular is said to have resided at her capital, Themyscira, if I'm pronouncing that right, on the banks of a river called Thermodon, which found its source in Mount Hypatius. The proposed location has ranged between Lycia and Caria and all throughout the modern Turkey region, though it seems like most researchers have accused Pontus and northern Anatolia as the true location, which just so happens to reside along the southern shores of the Black Sea. What I'm trying to show you here is that a lot of the references in this letter, they are all seem to be based around the Caspian and the Black Sea, and right there in that that kind of natural bridge and natural, I guess, wall that is referred to as Alexander's Gate, with Gog and Magog being on the direct opposite side, which just so happens to be where Ashkenaz came from. In 1219, the remains of 4 female warriors were unearthed in southwestern Russia, which just so happens to be the Gog-Magog region between the Black and Caspian Seas. They were Scythian and probably Amazonian. Their bones were tested and their ages varied from 12 to 13, 20 to 25, 30 to 35, and 40 to 50, the last of which, the 40 to 50-year-old woman, was found wearing an ornate golden headdress. The 30-year-old in particular was buried in a pose called the horseman. And what the horseman is, it's when your legs positioned to look like she's on horseback. Like they buried her to look like she's riding a horse. She was also found alongside 2 spears and a glass bead bracelet, but also a bronze mirror. A woman's beautifying process is never done, I guess, even in the afterlife. 2 years earlier, in 2017, Armenian archaeologists unearthed the remains of a woman who appeared to have died from battle injuries, as an arrowhead was buried in her leg. She was also decked out in jewelry because girls got to look their best in peace and war. You have to wonder how often they managed to show up on time. I'm sorry, that was a dig, but I was having fun with that one. I've been married happily for 22 years, so I can make digs like that. The 1990s hosted another extraordinary find. While excavating burial mounds outside of Pikrovka, alongside the Kazakhstan border, a joint U.S.-Russian team, so this is after the end of the Cold War, a joint U.S.-Russian team of archaeologists found over 150 graves belonging to the Saromatians, and among those graves, warrior women who had been buried with their weapons. The warrior women in particular measured 5'6" on average. Tough broads. That's tough. That's big for today. It's big for back then too. One female was bow-legged, the famous horse pose, laying with an iron dagger on her left side and a quiver containing 40 bronze-tipped arrows on her right. Another female still had a bent arrowhead embedded in the cavity. Oh, and another thing, the burial site of the last one, the one in the 1990s, was said to be 2,000 years old. 2,000 puts us in Christ territory. And what does that tell us? The Amazonians outlasted Homer and the Trojan Wars by well over 1,000 years, for starters. And that's official chronology. Women warriors rising up from time to time, that is, when they weren't working on their tan around the sunny shores of the Black and Caspian Sea, could totally have happened. But even more so, it helps to secure the theory which has Prester John as a king of Armenia and, king over the Amazonians as well. Now here we have a map of Africa. It says Prester John right there. You can see it in bold script. The legend of Prester John. India I can get behind, and even more so Armenia I can get behind. But Africa is the curveball in all of this. Anyone who has ever read the letter of Prester John, and we're talking the oldest surviving copies, will tell you the dude resided over India. But apparently, after centuries of Crusader propaganda in a noted historical account by Pax Tartaria, ambassador Marco Polo, there was an attempt to plant his bum down in Africa, even though Marco Polo wrote a big, long account about how Prester John was over there in the Far East Tartaria region. I know how the human mind works, and so there will be those out there who insist Africa is really the original location of Yasharel and Eden and all that, and Prester John is further proof of that. No, the sad fact of the matter is our controllers really are that lazy on occasion. They will feed a generation one lie only to reverse engineer, rebrand, or reboot the lie in another. This appears to be one of those instances when we can observe the multiple onion layers among the various resets. Why not just invent a new Christian king in Africa rather than recycle the old? Running out of ideas already? They decided that Prester John really originated in Ethiopia all along, and I'm willing to bet the normies were no longer buying it, which is why the Prester John legend was eventually run into the ground. To this day, the Catholic Church is still attempting to clean up the wreckage surrounding Prester John and claims the letter to be a Nestorian forgery. But come on, are you telling me that the Holy Roman Emperor and the Pope were pranked? Is that what you're saying, RCC? Surely the Pope and the Emperor had intel. Surely they knew about the Nestorians, notorious prankers, apparently. Surely they had somebody in 500 years who was willing to walk to Armenia and then to India if there were no camels available for rent. And even Prester John says in his letter that the pilgrims go out there all the time. Where are these reports? Did Prester John not visit the tomb of the holy prophet Daniel every year? I checked. The tomb of Daniel can be found in the city of Susa, which is Iran. The Archbishop of Susa is even said to have dined with Prester John. It's in his letter. According to Ma'asim, and that'd be the Acts of the Apostles, there were Persians, Parthians, and Medes among the first new converts at Pentecost. Since then, the ecclesia has had a continuous presence in Iran, not to mention a heavy cultural influence from the Armenians. Why not just walk to Susa and wait for Prester John's yearly arrival? To save time, they might consider having a crusader stop by the kingdom of Armenia to ask them about it. Oh yeah, this was the Dark Ages. I'd nearly forgotten. Telling us the world was closed off because nobody thought to pay the electric bills for hundreds of years, 1,000 years, is ridiculous, and not even the blue pillars are believing it anymore. Abraham managed the walk from Samaria to Canaan. Eliezer, that would be his servants, went round trip just to find a girlfriend for Abraham's son Yitzhak. That girl was named Rivka, and she had no complaints that we are made immediately aware of. She was able to make the journey. Not forgetting the 10 tribes of Yasharel. They were expelled from Yasharel and disbanded all throughout Prester John's 3 Indias. In fact, Prester John even thinks to mention them. He calls them the Jews. Are we to believe that nobody in a 1,000-year span was capable of making the journey? Yeah, right. Let's manage another look at Prester John's letter, shall we? We are expected to believe a priest king would write a travel brochure to the Byzantine emperor bragging about how large his ruling rod was without giving any roadside directions to back up his claim. And worse, exhibiting zero concern with actual spiritual matters as they pertain to the kingdom living. assuring us he is a Christian and that he goes about the earth defending Christians is so shallow that I couldn't even wet my eyebrows if I plunged headfirst into it. Was this another jab at the Byzantines for frustrating the RCC's effort in the Second Crusade? Oh, do tell again how his were the most beautiful daughters in the world, and not a single representative of royalty came calling, except Genghis Khan. Khan came calling and then cut him in two. Perhaps that is why he added in the part where the men only had sex with their wives 4 times a year, and that they had to wait upon their wives to come calling rather than the other way around. What better way to discourage actual men from ringing his doorbell? Obviously, the letter is a forgery. The history of Prester John is the history of a man who never existed, at least not as advertised. The official narrative called him into being when his presence was needed to help rally Christianity against Islam. I should say the RCC against Islam, though not all may be a loss. Very few of us accept the official narrative anymore, though perhaps I should simply speak for myself. The official narrative is deadly squat. And yet, what I have mostly been presenting to you is a Prester John which works as propaganda to that narrative. Well, what if something else is going on? The title Prester is an adaptation of the Greek word presbyteros, literally meaning elder, and is the origin of the word priest in English. In my Nazarene Christianity versus the Millennial Kingdom paper, I noted that the disciples of the original apostles were referred to as elders. Polycarp was an elder, as was Papias, both being instructed by Yochanan, that would be John, the apostle, Yochanan the apostle, the writer of the Gospel of Yochanan. What can be debated is whether or not Yochanan the presbyter, not to be confused with Yochanan the apostle, was an apostle or an elder. Now, fragments of Papias, that's a book I went over heavily in my Nazarene paper, have Yochanan the presbyter heralding from Ephesus, much like Yochanan the apostle did. And to add to the confusion, is said to have written 2nd and 3rd Yochanan in, or I should say 2nd and 3rd John in canonical scripture, whereas John the apostle only wrote 1st John. Sometimes he is literally called John the Elder. This would be the 2nd John, the writer of 2nd and 3rd John, though we are uncertain as an elder whether or not he learned from the feet of Yahusha. Hopefully this isn't confusing for you. What I am about to tell you may add to the transistor radio static, but the question has long been asked: was Prester John, in fact, John the Elder? Not the Apostle John, but John the Elder, the writer of 2nd and 3rd John. And remember, there were 2 Johns in Ephesus, John the Elder and John the Apostle. John is described as a priest king, telling us that he is a Melchizedek. The fact that his letter was discovered in Hebrew may be far more telling of its origins than most care to admit. The 72 kings under his belt shouldn't go unnoticed either. I talk about this a lot. We are being referenced to the 70 apostles, or 72 by some translations, who were sent out by Yahushua HaMashiach to proclaim the kingdom to the 70 nations, or the 72 nations, as well as the judgment of the divine shepherds, the Anunnaki, Alahayam, the gods, the watchers, who ruled over them. Is this what Prester John was getting at when speaking of the nations who were subject to him? I think it's a tip-off to that, the 72 nations. Telling us he lived in the proximity of Eden, or rather a river which flows from Eden, suggests the blessed land of the saints, a place which I am faintly familiar with, conversationally speaking, as I just so happen to have written a book on the subject, and it's called The Hidden Wilderness. Now, I'm just going to show you here. There's, of course, the moon, and you can see that there is a map of the greater realm on our moon. The red lines right here shows the circuit of the sun and the moon in our side of the realm. And, of course, over here on the left would be what you see here, the much larger realm, which I call the Hidden Wilderness. I believe that's the land of the saints. The Hidden Wilderness may be the biggest component to the Millennial Kingdom, as well as Hebrew cosmology, which nobody is talking about. I almost think it's despite the fact that I'm actually talking about it. I'm just shocked that more people aren't talking about the moon map. I think it's incredible, and it ties in with all the scriptural references to the kingdom in the hidden wilderness. It's why I decided to show you a picture of the moon map. Confused? Then you're either new here or haven't done your homework. This is a multiverse of research, and you'll have to read my report. Prester John describing his kingdom as extending to the place where the sun rises is another important piece of information, mostly because it does not venture beyond the circle of the sun and the moon, unlike the Blessed Land. The three Indias of Prester John can be found in our side of the realm. Now, the Blessed Land is further insinuated when Prester John mentions an uncharted land which exists beyond a sea of sand. One can only wonder if that's where L. Frank Baum nabbed his idea for Oz being surrounded on all sides by the deadly desert. The deadly desert is what protected Oz from the surrounding fairy kingdoms, corrupt fairy kingdoms which coveted and desired the childlike, carefree qualities in Oz in every which way. And I don't know if you were picking up on it too. No, we know that L. Frank Baum got the idea for the Emerald City from the Chicago World Fair, but the way he was describing his palace and everything sounded just like the Emerald City, like this glorious, just illuminated palace full of gems. Now, the Matrix Resurrections, that would be the fourth one, has already told us why our controllers would want a fabrication like Prester John written in the first place. The fourth Matrix movie may be an overly conscious movie, and it may not even be a good movie. But why get it hung up on reviews? It's still very much an intel movie. It's not like Prester John wrote a work of art either. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, his letter is not a work of art. Well, in the movie, Neo creates a successful video game, seemingly from his Jungian subconscious, which just so happens to fit the plot line to the first trilogy. He is not remotely aware that the story arc and characters happened in a former cycle of reality, and that he was, in fact, the protagonist of the said story. So hopefully you understood that. Like he dies at the end of the third one. The fourth one, he comes back. He's kind of like reincarnated, new cycle, has no idea that the other three movies happened or that he was the Messiah character, the liberator, and he actually creates an entire story thinking it's fiction. So incredible the way they did that. Of course, Neo's Matrix video game was a worldwide phenomenon. No surprise there. To borrow from the underlying message in Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut, Neo's spiritual handlers have their tentacles in everything. Therefore, its success can only be attributed to them, meaning it was intended to be a worldwide success because his controllers and handlers made it so. They chose that to be the success. Why would his controllers even want something like that out in the open? So that they could fictionalize the truth. Duh. Thereby marginalizing it. Not sure if you noticed, but specific locales within Prester John's kingdom involve the regions directly east, west, and south of the Black Sea. That just so happens to coincide with the district by which Komnenos ruled. That was the original Byzantine emperor to whom he wrote the letter. Not only that, but Prester John identified Mount Olympus as existing within his greater realm. Everyone realizes that's Greece, right? Mount Olympus is in Greece, Byzantine territory. And as I've already shown, the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor weren't too pleased with the Byzantines as the Second Crusade and as official history goes, finding them to be a nuisance at best. It appears as though the RCC was envious. They looked to their neighbors' possessions and lusted after it. They wanted Mount Olympus. They wanted the land of the Amazons. They wanted the Gate of Alexander and stewardship over the Gog-Magog people. Prester John, or cross that out, the Byzantines had in their possession the land of milk and honey, and they wanted that too. Prester John was the Lord of Lords in every which way a Shaloma or a Solomon and Messiah-like figure. Prester John may have been a projection. But then if you recall in my Nazarene research, The RCC was never able to conquer the Eastern Church, not even until the time of Constantine. Now, maybe they did afterwards, but up until the time of Constantine, the Eastern Church was still heavily influenced by the Nazarene. The Eastern Church was made up of the Nazarene, a group of believers who you should become intimately familiar with if you haven't already. Incapable of tossing the Nazarene archbishops to the curb, though they certainly tried, all they could do in the end was infiltrate. At what point in his story were the Nazarene weeded out, at least from the ranks of the bishops? To add to this, the letter of Prester John is considered by many to be Nestorian in nature. I mentioned that earlier, which is why I had stated earlier that Catholics swear up and down they had nothing to do with it and that they were had by Nestorian pranksters. What and who are the Nestorians? Well, the term ultimately refers to a man by the name of Nestorius, who was appointed a patriarch of Constantinople in 428. There it is. In turn, the theology of Nestorius was influenced by teachings of Theodore the Mopsuestia, the most prominent graduate of the school of Antioch. Nestorian Christology focuses upon Mary and the mother of Yahusha, making their study more of a Mariology, is what it's called, Mariology. And Nestorians reject the title Theotokos, or God-bearer, for Miriam, thus emphasizing distinction between divine and human aspects of the incarnation. Therefore, from the Orthodox point of view, Nestorianism denied the incarnation and represented Christ as a God-inspired man rather than as God-made man. Why is that doctrine a familiar one? Oh, yes, the Ebionites happen to believe something awfully similar, if not the same thing. Now, according to Ebionite Christology or Mariology or whatever you want to call it, Christ or Mashiach was a man who became one with Allahayam, his father, by adoption at his baptism, fulfilling the role of Mashiach from that point forward. I'm willing to bet there were many who believed in the Nestorian worldview, and hardly any referred to themselves as Nestorians. I mean, why would they? Nor did they care about the teachings of Nestorius. Claiming an idea after someone and then labeling every opponent according to his name is a great way to defeat an idea. That's what our controllers do. The barbarians were noted Arians, and yet the notion that the Alexandrian Arius invented the idea that God or Allahayam literally begot his son is a laughable one. The idea existed before Arius. Nor am I convinced in the slightest that Augustine invented predestination, by which we are not to name the concept, which we are now to name the concept after his student, John Calvin. That is how rounding up the opposition into camps is done. Calling your opposition Arians or Nestorian or what have you may have been a clever way to mask the Ebionites and Nazarene influence among them, particularly in the East. Even the original Mohammedans, the followers of Muhammad, Islam, may have been Ebionites or their ilk. And I've shown in my paper that actually his relatives, Muhammad's relatives, the people who founded Islam, the Quran, were Ebionites. Now, the most fantastical and perhaps telling element of Prester John's letter involves his possession of a scrying mirror. I don't know if you caught that. Supposing you've read my synopsis on Project Looking Glass, then you will probably recall my conclusion as well. They exist. The government which possesses one can look into many, if not all, potential outcomes and then manipulate the course of events to their benefit. There are always singularity events which God or Allahayam injects into his story, thereby overriding the plans of the enemy. Think of the collapse of Rome and the fire reset of 536. Rome may have worked every potential scenario to their advantage, but in the end, they could not escape the one event which promised their undoing. That would be a singularity event. The mirror as a source of magic and manipulation is a constant theme throughout mythology. Now, Snow White, you already know about. The Lord of the Rings is another one. The Romans may not have had Grimm's fairy tales, but they had Vulcan. the Roman god of fire, at their disposal. Vulcan was a qualified master metal worker. As a side project, he forged a magic mirror, which allowed him to gaze beyond the dimension of time into the future and the past. He then gifted it to Venus. In turn, the god of love cheated on Vulcan with Mars, using the mirror to calculate her means of not getting caught. I'm telling you right now, if Prester John had such a mirror at his disposal, then he would be a fool to include it on his laundry list of bragging rights. The Romans wouldn't sit idly by for several hundred years waiting for John to show face before they demanded it from him or waited for Genghis Khan to take it away. No way. Wars have been fought for lesser treasures. They ditched Jerusalem and the Crusader states and hightail it due east to India or Armenia or Africa or wherever Prester John was planting it. Unless, that is, Prester John looked into his scryer and discerned that loose lips would work to his advantage for some reason. We really don't know. Assuming for a moment that the letter is genuine, and assuming it is, then Prester John may have reason for writing every word that he did, given his mirror. Then again, you have to wonder if he managed the same counsel before refusing Khan's proposal for marriage with his daughter. Look, I'm not saying Prester John, the real Prester John character, didn't own one. It's just that I'm reading projection and covetousness all over this letter. The Romans may, in fact, be telling the Byzantines that they own such a mirror and that resistance is futile. Or perhaps, like history itself, the Prester John letter wasn't even forged until the close of the kingdom. Like, he was never even invented until like the 1500s. It was written as a farce of the Middle Ages, and the inheritors were tipping us off to what they'd reclaimed as their own. In this case, the mirror, among many other things. Like Neo's own imaginative invention passed into the hands of his video gamers, so too was the legend of Prester John a worldwide sensation. Of course, because our controllers deemed it so. It's almost like he too arises from our subconscious, informing his readers of a time and a place that never came to fruition as promised. He is a work of fiction, but is he, though? He may be a patsy. The more likely scenario has Prester John being a straw man, if anything. Prester John, we are told, was a mere mortal. And what's more, he guarded the tomb of the Apostle Thomas, not to mention his frequent excursions to the tomb of Daniel, both of whom had failed to resurrect from the dead, apparently. Is it possible that our controllers created a Millennial Kingdom saint, eerily attaching him to the Byzantine Empire as well, for the exclusive purpose of scrubbing the reality of his ilk from the various reset cycles to come? In later accounts, namely Marco Polo, Prester John got tangled up with the Tartarians, eventually biting off more than he could chew with the Khans. Who are our controllers ultimately attempting to defeat in this scenario? If the Tartarian Empire proves itself to be the kickstart of rebellion against the kingdom, as I suspect it to be, then might the story of Prester John ultimately celebrate the welcoming mat of Satan's little season of deception? Was Prester John's Ethiopian doppelganger another late addition to the kingdom which still needed defeated? Prester John may very well prove to be a flickering shadow on the wall of Plato's cave, intended to guide the official narrative along their invented path, fictionalizing the physical reality of Mashiach's 1,000-year reign at every possible turn. Good night, everybody.